At the Cairo royal palace, the image of a masked knight surrounded by flames and a radiant aura appears majestic. It is the supreme symbol of the knights, the royal knights who fight for the king, bearing the greatest responsibility and glory that the kingdom can bestow. With a serious expression, the royal messenger admitted that it is rare for someone to be directly appointed as a royal knight. Usually, the title is only granted to those who pass the rigorous tests personally organized by the royal family, clearly showing the rarity and absolute prestige of this title. But Roman Dmitri was an exception. The messenger smiled warmly as he announced that if Roman was willing to come to the capital and swear loyalty to the king, he would be granted the title without undergoing any examination, a rare privilege that demonstrated the strategic importance he held. Faced with that tempting offer, Roman remained silent, his cold gaze fixed on the messenger. He asked bluntly, "Is that all you want to meet me for?" The question made the messenger momentarily embarrassed, realizing this was not the reaction he had expected. Surprised, the messenger anxiously asked again, "Are you refusing the offer right now?" But Roman answered without hesitation. He confirmed it. As the eldest son of the Dmitri family, he felt he had lived a life free enough and had no reason to abandon it for a glamorous invitation from the capital. Awkward and worried, the messenger began listing more specific benefits. If Roman became a royal knight, he would be granted a private residence in the capital, and the Dmitri family's social status would be elevated far beyond its current standing. It was a great bargain for any noble. Roman was unmoved. He calmly replied, "Is that all the royal family can offer?" Which startled the messenger so much that he exclaimed, sorry." For the first time during the visit, he realized he was being led in the conversation. Unable to contain himself, the messenger slammed his hand on the table and loudly objected. He asserted that the royal invitation came from the great expectations the king had for Roman, a brilliant future beyond the reach of ordinary people. This was not just an honor but a strategic investment by the royal family. The messenger continued loudly, claiming that being granted the title of royal knight, along with a residence in the capital, was a rare privilege that not everyone could attain. He insisted these benefits were things Roman could not achieve on his own with his current status. Roman remained unshaken. With sharp eyes and a calm but authoritative voice, he decisively replied, "I think you are the one who is mistaken." Roman's absolute confidence left the messenger speechless once again, and the negotiation began to tilt toward the man the royal family had thought they could easily recruit. 5 days earlier, a messenger from House Gregory had come to see Roman Dmitri. It was not just a routine visit. He brought an extremely generous offer, a house in the capital, fertile land, and countless gold and jewels, all in exchange for Roman's loyalty. Not stopping at material wealth, House Gregory also wanted to bind the relationship through an arranged marriage. The tense reaction from the royal messenger showed he clearly recognized that the faction supporting Kronos had officially launched their scheme, making the situation even more complicated. 3 days ago, House Denver, a power supporting Valhalla, also approached Roman with the desire to become his patron. This made the messenger even more worried, as all major factions in the court had begun vying for influence by attracting Roman to their side. The night before, House Benedict also sent a messenger. Unlike the others, they made an offer far exceeding both value and ambition, overshadowing all previous invitations. House Benedict not only promised to pay triple the reward, but also pledged to elevate Dimitri's title to Viscount within a month, a promise that shook the very foundation of prestige that ancient noble families had built over generations. The royal messenger could not hide his pain as he admitted, "We have lost this battle." His face contorted, as if foreseeing the collapse of royal influence if they failed to recruit Roman. Despair overwhelmed him as his hands clenched silently. He understood clearly they had come too late, and the opportunity was no longer in the hands of the royal family. However, he did not give up hope. With a hurried voice, he begged Roman to reconsider. Although all those offers were dazzling, he emphasized that those families were traitors, conspiring to seize the entire kingdom. He pointed out that if not for the captain of the Royal Knights, the right hand of King Cairo, the rebellion would have erupted long ago. This was the only truth the royal family could rely on to maintain order. Roman listened quietly. He understood clearly the royal power had weakened and the government no longer respected them. In that situation, the title Royal Knight was the only thing they could offer, a symbolic title, but also the last pride remaining in the hands of the monarchy. Roman slightly smirked as he realized the current political landscape of the Kingdom of Cairo was nothing unfamiliar. The division of influence among 4 major powers in one country reminded him of his growing-up days amid the brutal power struggles under the demon god's command. No matter how dazzling the offers were, none could shake Roman's cold heart. He leaned back, clearly affirming that he had no intention of accepting any faction, whether noble, royal, or foreign power. Though fully aware of the unfavorable situation, the royal official still forced a smile. Roman's refusal was firm but not accompanied by betrayal, allowing him to salvage a faint hope that there was still a chance to turn the tide. Roman stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The tense atmosphere seemed to dissipate with his polite gesture, but the official nodded hastily in agreement, still unwilling to let go of his fragile hope. Before leaving, the official bowed deeply, his solemn words expressing loyalty to the royal family. He pledged to wait for the day Roman would swear allegiance to the emperor himself, as a final call amid chaotic times. 4 invitations and 4 refusals. No faction could bind the steps of Roman Dmitri, the man determined to walk his own path, refusing to be led or manipulated by anyone. Roman understood clearly, sooner or later he would become the enemy of all those powers. For him, the wisest choice now was to maintain neutrality, letting each side continue to harbor hope and prolong the time. A faint smile appeared on Roman's face, showing cold confidence. Though knowing the power game would soon turn bloody, he remained steadfast in his plan, let enemies dream while he silently prepared. Soft footsteps echoed in the cold corridor, signaling the arrival of a new figure. The silence was temporarily broken by the sharp sound of heels striking the stone floor. Roman turned around, surprised to see a stranger claiming to be Makeen from Valhalla's intelligence unit. Strangely, he wore a Dmitri staff uniform, a clear sign that the big game had just entered a new calculated phase. Roman narrowed his eyes, observing the stranger before him, his gaze sharp and full of caution. Though it was only a simple question, his calm voice carried pressure that made the other person unable to hide his unease. Still maintaining a serious expression, Roman harshly questioned the young stranger about a letter sent through House Denver a few days earlier. The killing intent in his eyes made the opponent unable to react in time, instinctively stepping back in shock. The young man named Makeen hurriedly bowed an apology, admitting that he had secretly tried to approach Roman. Fear clearly arose in his heart, as the natural aura and authority of the person before him far exceeded expectations. Under the surrounding pressure, Makeen explained why he could not convey the message openly before. Too many eyes watching forced him to blend into Dmitri's staff, and now was the right moment to communicate Valhalla's true intentions. Makeen began his speech, affirming that Valhalla was captivated by Roman's potential. However, they were also aware of the nationality barrier and Roman's asset ties to House Dmitri. To remove that obstacle, they proposed an attractive deal, granting the title of Viscount along with fertile land and an iron mine. Makeen further clarified that Valhalla's invitation was not only an opportunity for status and resources. They also allowed Roman to continue the forging tradition of the Dmitri family. Roman silently pondered. This was an offer that preserved ancestral honor while being strategically appealing. Not stopping there, Makeen emphasized the greatest value Valhalla could offer a knight, the chance to become stronger. His eyes shone with confidence as he stated benefits any warrior would crave. Makeen revealed the trump card in Valhalla's offer. Roman would be granted special access to their first-class archive, the highest security vault containing the most precious knowledge a knight could access. Roman listened intently as Makeen explained that within that archive were breathing techniques, swordsmanship skills, and Valhalla ancestors' journals, the foundational documents that created the nation's strength, reserved only for those truly trusted. A mystical scene appeared, depicting the first-class archive guarded by complex magical seals. Makeen affirmed that besides this special vault, it was the highest-ranked repository, holding supreme secrets symbolizing the absolute trust Valhalla placed in Roman. The Valhalla messenger did not hesitate to reveal his nation's ambition, to dominate the entire continent and become the sole empire. In his words, staying in Cairo was tantamount to accepting a tragic end for Roman's future. He continued to entice with promises of honor and power. If Roman accepted to join Valhalla, he would be celebrated as part of that glorious future. But behind the invitation lay a veiled warning full of threat. In his heart, the messenger believed Roman had no choice but to submit. Yet, contrary to all calculations, Roman responded with a firm refusal that instantly froze the atmosphere. The unexpected rejection shocked the messenger. He could not believe his ears. A normal person would never dare refuse such a precious opportunity from Valhalla. Roman stood firm, his gaze resolute. He affirmed that his refusal was not because the offer lacked appeal, nor due to blind loyalty to the kingdom of Cairo. Roman confessed that recently he had received countless similar invitations. However, choosing any faction now was merely a way to raise his own value only to be exploited later. Observing Cairo's current situation, Roman understood clearly, from the royal family to noble powers like Marquis Benedict, Count Gregory, and Count Denver, all had their own schemes. No one was someone he could easily entrust his loyalty to. Roman likened himself to a pawn on a complex political chessboard. Those invitations were not simply talent recruitment. They were ways for powers to control his future. He knew he stood at the most important crossroads of his life. He frankly declared he wanted to observe more, to judge for himself whether those calling him were truly worthy of sacrificing his life and everything for them. Roman's blunt and rational response stunned the Valhalla messenger. He thought Roman refused out of pride and vanity, but in fact, Roman was skillfully steering the game in an unexpected way. McKean believed that if he could lure Roman to his side, he would gain absolute and eternal loyalty from this man. In his mind, Roman only needed a sufficiently attractive invitation to surrender and submit. A relieved sigh escaped McKean, as if he was certain of victory. He had no idea that what was happening was exactly the plan Roman had long prepared, to use loyalty as bait to test the true nature of the recruiter. Though maintaining a polite smile, McKean had to show a firm attitude. He said Valhalla could not wait for Roman too long, implying the offer would not last forever, and time was running out for his choice. McKean's tone was gentle but clearly pressing. He asked Roman to think carefully but make a quick decision, trying to hide the pressure behind seemingly well-meaning words. Roman smiled calmly at the cleverly disguised pressure. With a brief answer, "Of course," he affirmed that he would respond, not because he was forced, but because he wanted to verify the true value of the promises. McKean turned to leave, suddenly exclaiming as if remembering something important. He turned back with a posture ready to deliver the final blow, to leave a deep impression on his opponent's mind. The Valhalla messenger said warmly that he would give Roman a gift as a sign of goodwill, but his expression and tone hid clear scheming. The gift was not simply hospitality. With a cold gaze and an inscrutable smile, McKean sent a final warning: be cautious of the southern battlefield. According to him, that place was nothing less than a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Meanwhile, in another space, a bittersweet atmosphere filled the room as a young man prepared to leave. His family stood around, sniffles sounded, the upcoming farewell full of worry and hope. Wearing neat armor, the young man looked at his father with determined eyes, promising to return safely. The father simply nodded, saying little, but his gaze contained quiet faith. The red cloak fluttered in the wind, signaling the journey had begun. The gentle wife comforted her husband to be at ease, trying to smile to dispel the anxiety weighing on his face. Though worried herself, she chose to reassure with reason, reminding him that this battlefield was not as dangerous as others. She emphasized that their son's destination was the southern front, a war zone considered the most stable and safest at present. Her words carried the simple hope and faith of a mother, always thinking well of her child's future. He nodded, his voice soft but resolute that their son would be fine. Behind that determined look were countless memories, pride, and nameless fears, things only a father could truly understand. Though verbally expressing trust, his heart still stirred with unease. Watching his son's figure in the bright hall light as the door opened, he could not hold back his emotions. After all, that was his own flesh and blood. Roman Dmitri turned back, his gaze firm, signaling the troops to prepare to depart. Though saying little, the commander's aura inspired absolute trust from his subordinates, marking the start of a new journey full of uncertainties. Amid the soldiers' unanimous response, the narration interjected like the whisper of fate. None of them could foresee what awaited Roman on the southern battlefield, a place seemingly peaceful yet hiding unpredictable dangers. The army arrived at the final base on the southern front as the sun set. Roman ordered a rest and preparation to continue the journey the next morning. The command was decisive, demonstrating strong leadership even though this place was only the starting point. The soldiers buzzed with excitement at being assigned lodging at an inn, a privilege never given to other nobles. They admired Roman not only for his background, but also for how he cared for his subordinates, creating a warm pause before the coming storm. In the inn room, Roman read the documents he had just received, his heart pounding. The words before him were not merely orders, they signaled something serious. The atmosphere suddenly grew heavy, indicating an unavoidable turning point. Angry shouting echoed from downstairs, accompanied by trembling and confused looks from the soldiers. When Roman descended the stairs, he encountered a scene of someone using their reputation to oppress others, a familiar image in the corrupt environments he had once sought to break. A soldier suddenly raised his hand, loudly declaring his identity, the second son of the Elbert family, clearly showing noble arrogance. He stepped forward with a smug expression, introducing himself as Henry Elbert, believing his prestigious background was enough to dominate everyone around him. Receiving the royal conscription order, Roman quietly read the letter, his eyes calm but harboring vigilance towards the changing world. The letter expressed Marquis Benedict's recognition of Roman's loyalty, while also hinting at a desire to draw him to the noble faction. Benedict candidly revealed his ambition, believing Roman might stand alongside him in battle, and thus arranged for him to be sent to the southern front instead of a harsher battlefield. In the empty room, Roman pondered under the sunset light, realizing Benedict's covert intervention to create favorable conditions for him. Benedict's final message sounded like an invitation. The doors of House Benedict were always wide open, waiting for Roman's choice. Recruitment letters kept arriving, demonstrating the noble faction's undisguised ambition to pull Roman into their ranks. Roman clearly understood his position, the only one who could counterbalance the royal knights, which Benedict needed to maintain power equilibrium. Although sent to the southern battlefield, Roman did not delude himself about safety, as information from Valhalla described it as a ticking time bomb about to explode. Roman accepted this truth with his usual calm. Soon, he would witness firsthand the true nature of this battlefield. The atmosphere suddenly changed when a cocky soldier introduced himself, Henry Elbert, the second son of the Elbert family, appearing with an arrogant demeanor. In response to Roman's question, a blonde knight explained the situation. A stranger wanted to drive them out of the inn, even though they had rented it entirely. Roman recognized the name Elbert, a once prestigious family long fallen, and thought silently that they were still blindly clinging to the past. Henry Elbert arrogantly pointed at Roman, asking contemptuously if he was the leader of that insignificant group. Roman calmly confirmed, but immediately after he asked Henry to reconsider everything happening before speaking further. Henry did not back down, warning that both factions would come to the southern training ground and advising Roman not to resist, as it would bring no benefit. With a proud expression, Henry issued an ultimatum, giving Roman 10 minutes to pack up the trash and leave this place. Roman remained unshaken. He affirmed he had no intention of leaving, despite Henry's contempt for the Dmitri family's status due to their provincial origin. Without further delay, Roman drew his sword. He understood that with someone like Henry, there was only one simple and effective way to resolve the issue. With overwhelming momentum, Roman unsheathed his sword and directly challenged, "Draw your sword." Roman coldly declared, if Henry could defeat him, he would leave the inn immediately, a challenge that could not be refused. Angry at the challenge, the pink-haired knight shouted furiously and charged at Roman Dmitri with an enraged and uncontrollable gaze. A knight in the group panicked upon realizing the danger, immediately rushing to hold back their leader, gasping and shouting, "Please stop, that is Roman Dmitri." The soldier hurriedly explained with a pale face. Roman Dmitri was the swordsman who broke the record as the youngest-ranked knight in recent history. Recognizing the opponent's identity, the pink-haired knight trembled, eyes wide with terror. The name Roman Dmitri made his heart pound in fear. Horrifying memories flooded back. Roman Dmitri, the youngest-ranked knight of Cairo, who had killed the eldest son of the Barco family right before the Count's eyes, becoming a battlefield nightmare. The cold truth became clear in his mind. Roman Dmitri was not only a strong warrior, but also a cold-blooded, emotionless demon. That was the infamous Roman everyone feared. Roman coldly asked why he had not drawn his sword yet. Meanwhile, the opponent's hand trembled, face pale, only able to think in panic that death was certain. Facing the pressure from Roman's momentum, he understood clearly. Drawing his sword meant his life was as good as over. Death was right before his eyes. With a forced demeanor, he quickly found an excuse to retreat, pretending to suddenly remember an important appointment and covering up to avoid the fight. Feigning regret, he stepped back and apologized, trembling as he withdrew from the tense situation. He did not forget to throw in a few words of pride, but deep inside was nothing but extreme fear. Elber, though trembling with fear, still tried to save face by loudly confronting Roman Dmitri. He hid his cowardice behind armor and arrogant words, declaring that if it were him, he would have punished anyone who dared insult the Elber family. However, just a solemn look from Roman was enough to make Elber's hair stand on end. Feeling the cold, killing intent from his opponent, Elber stammered, completely unable to hide his panic. Without another word, Elber turned and fled the hall at an astonishing speed, leaving the knights dumbfounded, unable to understand what had just happened. Roman remained standing silently in the blowing wind, his face calm as if nothing had happened. To him, the incident was like a passing breeze, not worth paying attention to. A young knight who witnessed the entire event was shocked and stunned. He thought to himself, is this really the reality of the southern battlefield? In that soldier's memory, that day was only the beginning. Similar incidents, challengers fleeing from Roman in fear, occurred 3 more times afterward. Each time the name, Roman, was mentioned, those who seemed arrogant would immediately turn pale and flee without hesitation. A female tavern owner smiled and explained. In the south, this was nothing unusual. Unlike the western battlefield, this place had peaceful relations with the kingdom of Hector and rarely saw conflict. She continued that the southern battlefield was considered a disguised resort for the nobility. Because it was safe and easy, noble offspring often found ways to be assigned here for duty. In the peaceful atmosphere of the tavern, Roman sat silently. That remark inadvertently explained why the arrogant ones fled one after another when faced with true strength, something they never expected to encounter at this resort battlefield. Roman's hand rested on the southern war map, his cold eyes scanning the terrain and strategic positions. Without a word, his intense focus signaled preparations beyond the calm exterior. Roman recalled the report. 48 days ago, scouts from the Kingdom of Hector had infiltrated southern territory 3 times. They caused no disturbance, only observed then withdrew, a repeated behavior that raised caution. Though lacking concrete evidence of an invasion, Roman relied on intuition and faint clues to conclude that the southern battlefield was not as safe as people mistakenly believed. Standing alone before the strategy table under flickering candlelight, Roman silently compiled every small piece of data. Though unable to confirm war intentions, he understood that complacency could be the start of a tragedy. A fleeting smile crossed Roman's lips as he whispered to himself about the upcoming war. In his heart, the scent of blood lingered somewhere, a premonition of one who had lived through danger. On the early morning training ground, a new figure appeared with a commanding presence. Viscount Vale Frank, the new commander of the southern battlefield, officially introduced himself and declared he would oversee training all new recruits here. Frank announced a 3-week training process, after which soldiers would be assigned to reserve bases. Though this was just a formality, the recruits showed obvious laziness and indifference, treating the duty like an extended vacation. Unwilling to accept complacency, Frank sternly emphasized that social status no longer mattered on the battlefield. Everyone was a soldier and must obey discipline. Anyone violating rules would face severe consequences. Those who disrespected the rules would be sent to the Western front lines, where real war took place. With a cold voice, Frank shocked the soldiers into realizing this was not just a resort as they had thought. Roman slightly frowned upon hearing that warning. To him, the Western battlefield had been a place to forge his courage. While others panicked, he remained calm, as if nothing could threaten him. After finishing the first training session, the commanding officer announced that the training schedule would be revealed at dinner. Everyone was asked to return to the dormitory to arrange their belongings, but Roman was informed by a knight that someone wanted to meet him privately. Roman was invited to meet Viscount Vale Frank, the commanding officer of the southern battlefield. With a bright smile, Frank spoke warmly, inquiring about Roman's recent journey as a welcoming gesture while probing the reaction of the famous young man. Roman responded briefly, showing little emotion. Frank cheerfully invited him to sit and created a relaxed atmosphere to start the conversation naturally, indicating his intention to build a personal relationship. In the quiet room, Frank began sharing his excitement upon learning Roman was assigned here. He could not hide his admiration and curiosity, as if he had long awaited this opportunity. Frank solemnly named Roman Dmitri, emphasizing the title, the youngest ranked knight of Cairo, then praised his outstanding talent. However, behind that enthusiasm was a calculating gaze silently observing Roman's reaction. After the flattery, Frank straightforwardly shifted the topic, asking if Roman was truly assigned to the southern battlefield through Marquis Benedict's influence. The question revealed the main purpose of the meeting. Roman did not evade, calmly confirming it. He asserted he did not request it, but heard that Benedict arranged it. While sipping tea, Roman maintained a composed demeanor, revealing little of his inner thoughts. Frank raised his eyebrows in surprise, but began analyzing internally. He realized Marquis Benedict was genuinely favoring Roman, making him a strategic asset in the eyes of ambitious individuals. A calculation flashed through Frank's mind. If he could build a close relationship with Roman, it might be the fastest path to enter the central government, where real power was concentrated. Without beating around the bush, Frank admitted his true intention. He wanted to impress Marquis Benedict, and getting close to Roman was the first step toward achieving his political ambition. Viscount Vale Frank acknowledged that, although the southern battlefield was not too bad, it could not compare to the luxurious life at the central government. Wishing to win Roman's favor, he promised to do everything to ensure a comfortable experience here. However, Frank did not hide his motive. In return for kind treatment, he wanted Roman to tell Marquis Benedict that it was he, Vale Frank, who treated him well to gain political points for himself. Roman recognized the brazenness of the offer, but with a casual smile, he saw no reason to refuse a benefit handed directly to him. Just after leaving the meeting room, Roman was immediately blocked by an aggressive young man. He shouted arrogantly, boasting noble origins and declaring his mother came from House Frank. In a furious state, he pointed at Roman's face, loudly bragging that he was Viscount Vale Frank's nephew, and asserting that Roman had made a grave mistake by crossing him. Roman remained calm before the threat, while the young man continued to struggle, not understanding why his intimidation had no effect. He grew angrier seeing Roman utterly unmoved. Unable to bear Roman's indifference, he stormed off angrily, shouting for his uncle to intervene and promising proper revenge with a scowling face. Shortly after, he approached Viscount Frank with a fake sorrowful expression, claiming he was threatened by someone of low birth. The story was exaggerated to provoke his uncle's anger. Rage flared up fiercely, and Vale Frank did not hesitate to declare he would trample anyone who dared insult his nephew. He immediately pointed at Roman without hesitation, as if turning the tables. But at that very moment, Frank realized the person his nephew was accusing was Roman Dmitri, the very man he had just tried to win over by all means. His expression instantly changed, while Roman stood still, his cold gaze unwavering. Pointing at Roman, the young man shouted, accusing him of threatening his nephew. Vale Frank was enraged, and before he could act, he suddenly swung his hand and slapped his nephew across the face, delivering a painful blow amid everyone's astonishment. The young nobleman collapsed, his face flushed from the harsh slap. His shocked question, "You, uncle?" showed he did not understand why he was being punished by his own uncle. As soon as he saw his uncle appear, the boy's eyes shone like stars, his face lighting up with joy and pride. Unable to hide his emotions, he called out excitedly, "Uncle!" like a child who has just found his childhood hero again. Viscount Vale happily responded to his nephew with a radiant smile. He opened his arms in welcome, unable to hide the affectionate feelings for his precious nephew, his eyes full of tenderness and pride as if embracing a beautiful part of his memories. Childhood memories flooded the boy's mind, the days when they played and laughed without a care. Vale always indulged every request, from mischievous pranks to childish antics. Back then, he was not just an uncle, but the closest relative. In his tender heart at that time, he loved Uncle Vale more than his own parents. That deep affection made every reunion a search for recognition, always hopping to gain his uncle's attention and protection. In the vast hallway, the boy hurriedly ran to his uncle in a flustered state, as if once again seeking the protection of old. But change was looming, confronting harsh reality. With a bewildered expression and trembling voice, he called out, "You, uncle," clutching his cheek, the very spot just struck by the uncle he revered. The physical pain was nothing compared to the mental shock that had just hit. At this moment, Viscount Vale's mind revealed clear calculations. He realized Roman Dmitri was not someone to be underestimated. He was the one catching Marquis Benedict's attention, a potential figure to change the future power dynamics. In a gentle yet cautious tone, Vale bowed his head to take the blame on behalf of his nephew, showing political tact and flexibility. He affirmed that such insolence would not happen again, at least not in front of Roman. Roman, still maintaining a calm demeanor, nodded in approval. He forgave not out of kindness, but because Vale still held some value in his eyes. As someone gradually asserting power, Roman understood when to hold on and when to let go. The meeting ended in tense atmosphere masked by polite words. Vale saw Roman off with thanks, but inside he was boiling with anger. He turned back and unleashed his fury on his nephew, the one who almost cost him points before a dangerous figure like Roman. A flash of realization lit up Viscount Vale's eyes as he suddenly grasped the seriousness of his recent action, a moment that made him sober up, full of tension and confusion. With a serious face, Vale tried to salvage the situation. He decided to keep his nephew close to Roman at all times, from training to missions, as a way to mitigate the consequences of the recent slap. Before Henry's bewildered eyes, Vale issued a stern order. He urged him to find a way to approach Roman at all costs, as a covert political mission. Before Henry could react, Vale continued, threatening that if he disobeyed, he would be sent to the Western front line, where a brutal battlefield awaited. Vale's warning stunned Henry. Fear was evident on his face, his heart heavy with the grim prospect he might have to face. The scene shifted to a new dormitory room, a simple, quiet space reflecting a significant change in the protagonist's living environment. Roman Dmitri entered the room, observing the furnishings with sharp eyes. He thought silently that Viscount Vale had tried to win him over by arranging this room specially. He analyzed the situation coldly. To Roman, those easily swayed by greed were ideal prey, easy to control and easy to eliminate. A faint smile appeared. Roman told himself that life at the southern front line might not be too bad, especially since everything was going according to plan. The entire camp appeared under pale sunlight. Inside the building, a sigh echoed, signaling the start of a new phase full of scheming. With absolute loyalty to the Kingdom of Cairo, McBurney volunteered to fight on the western battlefield, where he fought tirelessly for a decade to protect the borders from enemies. Starting from a lowly commoner status, he gradually proved his ability, courage, and intelligence to be entrusted with commanding a unit of 100 men, the result of blood, sweat, and resilience. However, all that glory quickly collapsed in a moment when he lost his right arm in a fierce battle, the arm that once wielded a sword to protect the kingdom. In excruciating pain, what made McBurney most desperate was not the wound, but the harsh truth that his warrior career had ended. Instead of a quiet ending, he was honored by the kingdom with a prestigious position, head trainer of the southern battlefield, an opportunity to continue contributing in the role of a teacher. Though his heart still ached for not being able to wield a sword again, McBurney nodded to accept his new fate, believing he could still protect the kingdom in another way. But as soon as he set foot on the southern battlefield, he realized the system there was rotten and inefficient, completely opposite to the discipline at the western front line. At the western battlefield, soldiers regardless of origin ate, trained, and fought together. But here, the nobility lived indulgently, exempt from all training duties. Faced with this disappointing reality, McBurney planned to retrain from scratch, starting with physical conditioning for 3 weeks before moving on to a strict training model he established himself. Behind the glass door, McBurney quietly observed the lazy noble recruits playing around, his eyes shining with determination to restore discipline and warrior spirit to this place. Although he had outlined a strict training plan starting with 3 weeks of physical conditioning, the head trainer only received indifference from lazy glances through the window, where noble soldiers sat in groups, laughing instead of training. He soon realized the bitter truth. The noble class, who held command roles, did not care about training. When leaders do not set an example, the entire camp's training system is nearly useless. Standing amid a camp rotten from laziness and pretense, the head trainer could not hide his frustration and disappointment. He wondered what this place existed for if not for fighting. He walked silently, his heart heavy. Even when soldiers only needed to pretend to train, they wouldn't bother to fake it. With every step, his anger grew stronger in his chest. Passing through the campyard, laughter and chatter echoed everywhere. They didn't bother to show respect before the superior's presence, making him feel like he had entered a hopeless place. Standing in the southern camp, considered the closest front line, he sighed in disgust. Instead of being an elite training ground, it was a land of laziness and complacency. At that moment, his eyes suddenly changed. Something unusual caught his sight, awakening the instincts of a veteran who had fought for decades. In front of him was a neat formation, ranks astonishingly orderly, something he had never seen since arriving at this rotten southern battlefield. Not only organized, that group of soldiers had a leader, a rare figure who commanded the entire team's obedience and created order amid chaos. Under the harsh sunlight, the disciplined formation stood out sharply from the rest. With cold eyes, their leader was clearly visible, leaving the trainer shocked by surprise and a flicker of hope rekindled within him. Roman Dmitri told himself that perhaps those noble soldiers still did not fully understand this place. When a soldier called his name, an officer quickly explained, "At the southern front line, no one forced nobles to train." The officer smiled, showing friendliness, saying that if Roman felt tired, he could rest in the shade with the others. This light-hearted joke was full of implications about the privileges that the noble class often enjoy. Roman was not easily fooled by the implied invitation. He turned his serious gaze to the lazy noble soldiers and asked directly, "Are you saying that because of them?" The officer followed Roman's gaze, then calmly admitted it. Against the backdrop of laughter and chatter from the lazy group of soldiers, the answer was even more bitter. Roman coldly retorted. He asserted that on the battlefield, the enemy does not care about your status, and there is no law stating that war only happens on plains. He continued to analyze. The battlefield can be mountains, rivers, swamps, and countless other difficult terrains. A good commander must have adaptability and physical strength to lead troops through all terrains. Roman emphasized, if soldiers are not strong enough to overcome harsh terrains, they will fail. And of course, commanders themselves must train seriously like all other soldiers. The officer, who initially underestimated Roman, was now genuinely surprised. He realized Roman not only understood the spirit of the southern battlefield, but also grasped the full meaning of the training plan here. Without hiding his feelings, Roman calmly declared, "No need to pretend to be friendly with me." With a decisive attitude, he affirmed he was ready to endure any form of training, regardless of noble status. The officer, faced with Roman's firm and understanding attitude, seemed to be defeated. Respect flashed in his eyes as he acknowledged that Roman was completely unlike the nobles he had met before. McBurney clenched his fists, unable to hide his emotion upon witnessing Roman as the first noble willing to give his all in training, breaking the long-held prejudice that the upper class lived only on privileges. Deep inside, McBurney realized, only those who truly understand the value of life have the courage to risk it for ideals. It was Roman who changed his perspective on training nobles. Abandoning his previous intention to compromise and be lenient, McBurney was determined to change the entire plan. Starting today, there would be no special privileges for nobles during training. With resolute eyes, McBurney promised himself to devote all his effort in the next 3 weeks to make this training course a success, helping all soldiers, regardless of status, be ready for battle. After a deep breath to regain spirit, McBurney stood on the wooden platform and loudly announced the start of the first training week, officially launching the harshest program the camp had ever seen. McBurney's heartfelt decision initiated an unprecedented brutal training phase, a true hell for those who wanted to survive and grow on the battlefield. The recruits, led by Roman, rushed into the first exercise. Sweat and heavy breathing did not yet show full intensity, but their serious eyes indicated their spirit had begun to change. McBurney shouted with fierce determination. This was not just physical training but preparation for the fiercest battles where speed and reflexes determined survival. Regardless of sunny or rainy days, soldiers had to climb mountains daily. This strict discipline was applied equally to force everyone to train their willpower and endurance alike. While McBurney shouted orders, the nobles accustomed to luxury began to feel the harshness. Surprise was clear on their faces as they realized that real hell had begun. As evening shadows fell, McBurney emphasized, war requires not only strength but also infinite patience. He made them continuously swing their weapons, stressing the goal of surpassing physical and mental limits. For those who gave up halfway, the punishment was extra training after hours, even sacrificing sleep. Under the moonlight, the weary soldiers complained. They had thought the southern front was easier, but the truth was too harsh. No one expected the training to be so brutal from the very first day, and it seemed the main cause was a single person. One soldier, unable to contain his frustration, loudly demanded that the other consider those who were not strong enough to keep up. Others agreed, expressing that they were forced to enlist suddenly and had no time to prepare like those who had been trained beforehand. With much shorter training time, they knew well that it was difficult for them to match the physical strength and speed. The young man leading them, Henderson, a citizen of Lawrence, calmly faced them and counter-questioned. "So how long have you been training?" Henderson stood tall before them, exuding a cold and confident aura, waiting for an answer to expose their true ability. When questioned, one of the new soldiers looked embarrassed and stammered that they only had 1 year to train. His eyes showed helplessness, believing falling behind was inevitable compared to those with many years of preparation. However, Henderson immediately rebutted. With sharp eyes and a decisive voice, he revealed that his group had only trained for 3 months. The excuses blaming circumstances were instantly silenced, replaced by the exposure of a shocking truth. Henderson accepted no excuses. Amid the tense atmosphere, he bluntly pointed out the core issue, lack of determination. For him, the barrier was not time, but their unwillingness to commit wholeheartedly. On the day, Henderson happened to see the recruitment poster hanging in the square, amidst the bustling crowd discussing it. A sudden and resolute decision ignited within him that no one had ever expected. Without hesitation, Henderson resolved to become a servant under Roman Dimitri, a figure who was shaking the land with his reputation and extraordinary power. In his mind, this was not a formal soldier recruitment, so Henderson believed the entry requirements would be easy, just needing a willing spirit. But the reality was much harsher. Due to the shocking offer from Roman, veteran mercenaries like Lucas and Pucky also registered, making the selection environment fiercer than ever. For a moment, Henderson felt like a weak prey among a pack of predators, surrounded by seasoned warriors with the aura of wild wolves. Anxiety surged in his mind, and Henderson wondered if he, a person without combat experience, could do anything or would just be a burden among those formidable people. Facing the recruitment officer, Henderson bowed his head apologetically, confessing that he was not qualified to serve under Roman, his eyes full of guilt and inferiority. The other person asked gently but piercingly, "Why do you think so?" Henderson replied with self-doubt, believing everyone knew he was just a trainee who didn't even know how to hold a sword properly. He continued to confess his past, a farmer who only knew how to till and cultivate. The thought of joining Roman's ranks was, to him, nothing more than an unreachable fantasy. The other listened attentively and then asked, "So you intend to give up just because you're not as good as others?" That question cut deep into Henderson's insecurities. He could only whisper, "Yes," confession both sad and helpless. Chris began the story with a sincere recollection, admitting his first impression of Kevin was just a grumpy kid with a hostile gaze, nothing outstanding or promising. Henderson continued, frankly expressing his past skepticism about why Lord Roman accepted a mediocre person from the slums like Kevin into his ranks. Chris asked pointedly with hidden meaning, did Henderson know how Kevin had changed? Then he told about Kevin's remarkable growth. In a short time, he became a warrior recognized by all. Chris admitted he had started out exactly the same way. Chris did not hide his initial foolishness, recounting the first time he met Roman and recklessly challenged him without knowing who he was facing. The result was nearly losing all his front teeth from one blow. At that time, Chris considered himself the center of his small world but actually knew nothing. Under Roman's guidance, he, like Kevin, transformed completely and understood what true strength was. Chris looked seriously at Henderson and conveyed the core message. The right to become a soldier lies in Lord Roman's decision. Although Henderson is weak now, he can fully grow like Chris and Kevin. Chris affirmed with absolute faith that, thanks to Lord Roman's power and vision, anyone can change and become strong if properly guided. Though Henderson still doubted himself, he began to be moved. Clenching his hands, he admitted he did not believe in himself, but a seed of determination had been kindled. While working in the fields, Henderson pondered. He told himself that if Lord Roman chose him over hundreds of others, there must be a reason. Despite being just a farmer by birth, he began to yearn to be stronger. Finally, Henderson raised his head with a determined gaze. He decided to trust Chris's words and the faith Lord Roman had placed in him. That was the first step on the journey of a soldier's growth. From that moment on, his life completely changed. In the following months, he struggled on the edge of survival through the harsh training led by Roman, surpassing both physical and mental limits. Despite vomiting and fainting from exhaustion, he gritted his teeth and endured, not for glory, but because of a fragile belief in himself and the ideal that Roman had ignited. He walked in pain but did not allow himself to fall behind. With burning determination, he strove to keep pace with his teammates step by step. Finally, after months of training, he became a new person, strong, steady, and brave enough to face the battlefield. The question echoed like a wake-up call. What is war to you? A teammate answered with a tense expression. War is a life-or-death battle where only the strong survive. No one waits for others to prepare, and there is no room for hesitation. He looked straight at the other person, showing no leniency. Knowing himself weak but not trying to change, instead dragging others down, that was something he could not accept. His criticism made the atmosphere heavy. The young soldier only bowed his head silently, unable to respond, while others watched quietly. He stepped down to the stream, concluding coldly, "Disappointing." In the eyes of Roman soldiers, the war had begun long ago, in their minds and every thought. The extreme physical training continued relentlessly. Every step was a test of willpower, and the difficulty only increased day by day. Yet Roman soldiers persevered. No one gave up. They gritted their teeth and gave their all because they knew only by fighting to the end were they worthy of the trust their Lord placed in them. Under the shade of trees, some soldiers complained about the intensity of the training. They didn't understand why they had to try so hard, especially when the southern front was not as tense as the western one. One of them sneered, saying that only those from lowly origins had to make such futile efforts. He believed that if Dmitri didn't push himself, he would never be recognized. The remark quickly received agreement from a few others. Meanwhile, the gaze of one soldier silently observed, neither agreeing nor opposing, just quietly watching. A chubby boy turned his head to glance back, feeling confused. He silently wondered how to win over his commander, a person who seemed distant and hard to approach. The boy continued watching Roman from afar, who was still diligently training alone. Disappointment was clear in his heart as Roman showed no interest in socializing or being friendly with other nobles. A feeling of discomfort rose within him. Although Roman was also a noble, his humble origins made the boy unable to accept him and look down on those of similar backgrounds. Then he yawned deeply, leaning against a tree as if brushing away all worries. With a careless attitude, he believed everything would be fine without any further effort. At the same time, in the magnificent palace, a completely different scene unfolded. Golden walls silently surrounded the quiet space before an important briefing. Standing before the throne, Captain Jackson of the scout troops bowed respectfully. He came to report the intelligence gathered over a long period. Jackson presented to the king the situation on the southern front. Over the past year, his team had infiltrated Cairo's defense system 48 times and discovered that the enemy had concentrated all forces on the west, neglecting the southern line, opening an opportunity for attack. With sharp eyes and a decisive tone, King Hector affirmed that the invasion of the southern battlefield would face no difficulties, showing absolute confidence in the proposed military plan. The royal banner of the Kingdom of Hector was displayed majestically, evoking a glorious past when the country was a power comparable to the Kronos Empire. Thanks to a strong national defense force, Hector once developed rapidly. However, a heavy defeat against Valhalla in a brutal war left the kingdom in a precarious situation. The crushing defeat against Valhalla not only caused heavy losses for Hector, but also led to the loss of everything. Its reputation and status, once comparable to an empire, now remained only as remnants replaced by Cairo. From a glorious power, Hector is now just one of 6 kingdoms on the continent, living cautiously and carefully under the dominant power of larger empires. In the magnificent hall, Prince Edwin Hector asked for permission to speak. The king agreed to let Edwin express his concerns about the state of the country. Edwin seriously stated the reality reality. For the past 5 years, the kingdom of Hector has suffered unprecedented crop failures, pushing the country into a severe food crisis. Although loans were taken from the Gold Bank to overcome the difficult period, the sky-high interest rates became an unbearable burden, causing the treasury to gradually deplete. When the treasury was left with only a few coins, Edwin frankly admitted that if this situation continued, the kingdom of Hector would no longer be able to survive as an independent nation. King Hector, with a heavy face full of regret, acknowledged the bitter truth. The country is now paying the price for a war their ancestors once initiated, a historical mistake that has lasted until now. The king sighed softly as he heard his son recount the dire situation, but his eyes were no longer as gloomy as before. After a year of silent preparation, Hector had a plan to act, ending the days of mere endurance. Edwin stepped forward, his eyes revealing determination. For the desperate people and the survival of the kingdom, he asked his father to make a final decision. From deep within, a terrifying word echoed in the king's mind: war. He had never dared to utter it. While he considered himself weak, Edwin possessed courage and strength he never had. Sitting on the throne, the king looked up at his son. He questioned whether Edwin was confident enough to bear this heavy mission. Without hesitation, the prince replied that he had been ready for a long time. After a moment of silence, the king declared before the throne that from now on, all military power and decisions regarding war in Hector would be fully entrusted to Edwin, the kingdom's only prince. Silently bowing before his father's decision, Edwin showed respect and accepted the responsibility with a heart prepared to enter a battle with no escape. "Yes, father." With just one reply, Edwin officially took on the role of supreme commander of the war, taking the first step on the path that would determine the fate of the entire kingdom of Hector. At the same time, on the southern front line, the harsh 3-week training phase for the soldiers came to an end. The young army was now ready to receive their mission. With a bright smile, the training officer announced the soldiers' deployment location. They would be sent to the 5th Defensive Line. Excitement spread throughout the ranks. After a light cough, the officer revealed he had used personal connections to place the young man at the highly coveted defensive line. In response, the boy simply bowed his head in thanks. As the door closed after their conversation, polite laughter echoed. The powerful man still acted friendly, promising help whenever needed, but inside, the soldier felt a more complex emotion than gratitude. At the city gate, the soldier bowed one last time in gratitude. Under the clear blue sky, he said a respectful farewell, closing a chapter of his military career. Facing Roman Dmitri, the trainer tearfully confessed that it was thanks to Roman that he had rediscovered his ideal of service. Now, he could inspire and train the next generation of soldiers with renewed passion. He reached out to hand Roman a letter. Though small, it contained all the heart and faith that the veteran entrusted, hoping to contribute something before leaving. Inside the letter were detailed notes about the terrain and characteristics of the southern battlefield. Although optimistic that war was unlikely, he cautiously handed over the information as a preparation for the future. Roman received the gift with a sincere smile. He said little, only wishing the departing soldier peace and happiness, a simple but heartfelt blessing that encapsulated the respect he held for his comrade. Looking into Roman's eyes, the soldier could not hide his emotions. Deep inside, he silently wished he could continue fighting under this leader, a man to whom he truly wanted to dedicate his life. After 3 weeks observing Roman Dmitri, the soldier realized this was a man worthy of complete trust. Majestic, steadfast, and upright, Roman had awakened in him absolute admiration. But then that feeling was pulled back to reality. He bowed his head and gave a sad smile. The painful truth was that he was no longer suitable. His incomplete body meant he was no longer capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with Roman. From afar, the soldier told himself that Roman already had enough outstanding companions. As for him, with his lost arm, there was no longer a place beside the hero he admired most. Lucas finally made the decision to part ways, bowing respectfully to Roman Dmitri. In his heart, the faith and feelings for the commander remained intact, but he knew clearly he was no longer capable of fighting alongside the one he admired. Roman watched Lucas's back as he left through the barracks gate, saying nothing. That silence held respect and understanding. Each step Lucas took was a silent farewell, etched deeply into the memory of the one left behind. In Roman's hand was a detailed map of the southern battlefield, a document Lucas had risked his life to obtain. The price paid was not small, making the value of the gift more sacred than ever. Roman smiled softly as he looked at the map, feeling genuine gratitude. To him, a sincere act needed no flowery words. Just sincerity alone was worthy of lifelong respect. At the southern front line, everything seemed peaceful. Soldiers observing from the fortress had no idea that a storm was about to strike. That calm was merely the prelude to a great upheaval. In that brief moment, a soldier noticed something unusual. From the horizon came loud shouts. A sudden ambush was approaching. The real battle had begun, plunging everyone into a whirlpool of blood and life-or-death choices. On the eve of intense conflict, an elderly man with resolute eyes ordered Henry. He would be assigned to the 5th Defensive Line, where Roman Dmitri was stationed. It was not merely a troop deployment, but a deliberate arrangement, a chance and also a challenge. Amid the gloomy clouds of political scheming, Henry's final instruction echoed in his mind. Over the next 2 years, he must do everything possible to establish a close relationship with Roman Dmitri. On the journey to the front line, he carried pressure and doubt. As the troops entered the 5th Defensive Line camp, Henry walked slowly beneath the swaying leaves. The memory of the order still lingered, pushing him closer to a destiny he was not yet ready to face. Henry's face clearly showed dissatisfaction. He muttered about the absurdity of the order to be close to someone he considered detestable. Yet, he also admitted inwardly that being assigned to this line was fortunate, even if he did not fully understand why. The alarm horn blared loudly, shattering the brief peace. Henry looked up, his eyes filled with confusion and worry. War had truly arrived. The emergency bell rang throughout the camp. An officer shouted that the kingdom of Hector had officially declared war. The entire camp immediately erupted into chaos, preparing for the fierce confrontation ahead. Henry was stunned amid the panic. He repeated the keywords he had just heard. War. Prepare to fight. Everything happened so suddenly that he could not grasp what was going on. In the chaos, Henry was shocked to realize something unexpected. Roman had disappeared. No one knew where he had gone, which only heightened the anxiety to its peak. Although Hector targeted the 1st Defensive Line, the real threat weighed heavily on the 5th Line. The enemy had breached the city gates, pouring inside like a flood, plunging the defenders into a desperate situation. The sound of clashing metal echoed everywhere amid screams. The enemy surged from all sides, weapons whistling, blood spilled across the walls. Desperate cries for help resounded across the battlefield, while hope for survival gradually faded. In extreme panic and fear under enemy pressure, a middle-aged officer trembled and uttered surrender. That was Baron Bruce, the commander of the 5th Defensive Line, who had lost his composure amid the critical situation unfolding on the battlefield. The 5th Defensive Line had long ceased to be a true defensive outpost. It was contemptuously called the paradise of the southern battlefield, where nobles indulged in partying and drinking, neglected military duties, and treated the place as a luxurious resort. This deterioration stemmed from the corruption of its leader, Baron Bruce himself. He did not hesitate to accept all kinds of bribes from soldiers and nobles to turn a blind eye, turning the defensive line into a storehouse of gold and laxity. Fully aware of the consequences of lax military discipline, Bruce inwardly regarded holding the 5th Line at this time as nothing less than suicide. He only wanted to find a way to escape before the situation got out of control. Yet outwardly, Bruce tried to appear strong, shouting orders like a responsible commander. He yelled at the soldiers that they must defend the fortress to the end for the safety of civilians, while he himself prepared an escape plan. Amid the roaring sounds of battle, Bruce continued ordering the soldiers not to retreat. He shouted loudly to maintain morale, forcing the remaining troops to stand firm on the walls while he prepared to flee. Immediately after, a scene of betrayal unfolded. As the battle line was in peril, Bruce calmly turned his back and fled along the wall. A soldier shouted in shock to call him back, but it was too late. Their commander was escaping. Bruce showed no shame. While fleeing, he shouted back excuses, saying he needed to contact the royal family and that everyone needed to buy time. These were just pretexts to justify his own cowardice and betrayal before his troops. While Commander Bruce was retreating, Roman Dmitri, the warrior assigned to the 5th Defensive Line, immediately shouted to gather all soldiers. Without hesitation, he ordered an urgent move to the position needing support. The soldiers quickly responded to the order. With iron discipline, they replied in unison, "Understood, sir," and immediately marched toward the battle line. Under Roman's leadership, hope for a counterattack began to ignite where despair had seemed absolute. As the battle raged fiercely, a troop clad in black armor advanced swiftly through the forest. Among them, a warrior in a red cloak stood out at the front, like a spear piercing through the veil of helplessness over the southern battlefield, which had long been mired in backwardness and indifference. With cold eyes and lightning speed, the young warrior in the red cloak was confirmed as the main figure heading toward the fatal weak point of the southern defensive line. According to assessments, among the entire front, the 5th Defensive Line was the weakest, as the soldiers there were lazy, poorly equipped, and commanded by an incompetent leader. The battle map appeared, revealing a serious strategic mistake. The reserve forces, the last hope in an emergency, were stationed 2 hours away from the front line. That distance had now become a deadly burden for the 5th defensive line. The young warrior clenched his fists, eyes resolute. He understood clearly, if he did not arrive within an hour, everything would collapse. There was no time to hesitate. He poured all his strength into changing the fate of the battle. While cutting through the forest toward the battlefield, the warrior suddenly encountered a familiar figure, a man staggering toward him. It was Baron Bruce, commander of the 5th defensive line, who had caused dismay throughout the rear. Panting and disregarding formalities, Baron Bruce immediately demanded to be escorted to the rear. He brazenly declared that his life was more important than the 5th defensive line, and that his urgent duty was to report to the royal family, though in reality he was seeking escape. Looking at the man before him, the red-cloaked warrior immediately recognized him as Baron Bruce. He coldly asked, "Why are you here alone, with no soldiers accompanying you?" The question struck directly at the dying conscience of the man who had abandoned the trenches. Baron Bruce angrily shouted as if insulted. He could not believe that a young man, even a noble, dared to question him. He loudly demanded respect for his rank and threatened back, unaware that his opponent's patience had run out. The red-cloaked warrior sneered with contempt. He muttered, "I don't need to hear any more." In that moment, everything was clear. No excuse could cover up Baron Bruce's cowardice and irresponsibility. Without hesitation, the warrior lunged forward and grabbed Baron Bruce by the collar. The face of the former commander twisted in panic. He had decided this man was unworthy to lead anyone, even unworthy to speak amid the fierce war. As Baron Bruce was lifted by the collar, cold sweat poured down his forehead. Roman needed no further questions. His cold gaze said it all. The presence of Bruce here had only one meaning. Roman bluntly exposed the truth. Bruce, as commander, had abandoned his soldiers in danger to flee cowardly. The sharp accusation was like a blade that Bruce could not refute. Roman's cold face drew close, his voice sounding like a verdict. According to military law, anyone, regardless of rank, who deserts can be executed. Bruce began to realize the severe consequences of his actions. Roman confirmed without hesitation. That was correct. If Bruce had at least retreated with his soldiers, he might have survived. But because he chose the cowardly path, death at Roman's hands was the inevitable outcome. The verdict ended with a clean slash. Blood splattered everywhere. Baron Bruce's head fell to the ground. Roman sheathed his sword, his gaze still calm, as if clearing useless trash from the battlefield. Without a word wasted, Roman ordered, "Let's go." His attendant immediately responded. Bruce's body was left in the forest, a symbol of the harsh justice of the battlefield. At the front line of the 5th defensive position, soldiers lay scattered among blood and corpses. Desperate curses echoed, clearly expressing disappointment and rage at being abandoned. A young soldier with blue hair gripped his sword tightly. Blood flowed from his wounds, but his eyes blazed with determination. He had always known this day would come, and now was the time to fight to his last breath. Amid the fierce clashing of metal, the soldier fought while shouting. Their commander had completely abandoned the army. In his fury, he poured all his strength into a counterattack and yelled, "Forget him." However, anger and loyalty were not enough to turn the tide. A sharp slash pierced his body, blood spraying everywhere. The soldier, though determined not to fall, suffered a fatal wound. Stephen knelt on the bloody battlefield, his body covered in wounds. He was nearly exhausted, trembling and unable to stand, but in his eyes still flickered a will that refused to surrender. In Stephen's mind echoed a desperate voice, "This is the end." He imagined invisible shadows symbolizing death closing in on him. The feeling of helplessness made him bow his head, awaiting fate's judgment. As if the Reaper's scythe was about to strike, Stephen's kneeling figure became the focal point amid the rain of blood. Cold slashes cut through the air, yet strangely, he remained motionless, as if accepting everything. The horrific scene unfolded in an instant. Blood gushed out, body parts scattered everywhere. Screams and clashing swords resounded like a symphony of hell. A young soldier was thrown violently backward, blood streaming from his chest, eyes wide open in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Extreme fear engulfed the battlefield. At that moment, a red cloak fluttered in the air, catching Stephen's attention. He looked up, astonishment clear on his face as a calm voice rose from the newcomer. Roman Dmitri appeared like a man who held the power to decide fate. With a firm declaration that Baron Bruce was dead, he officially took command here, allowing no one the chance to question. In Roman's mind, the name Stephen immediately surfaced. He clearly remembered it had been noted by Lucas on the list as someone with notable potential among the 5th defensive line ranks. Another figure with a cold expression also confirmed this. Only Stephen remained valuable among all the forces here. The choice was clear. Without a doubt, Roman Dmitri entrusted decision-making power to Stephen. He trusted the young man's experience and understanding of this defensive line. Roman's words were not just orders but a commitment. If this place truly could not be held, he would personally arrange a retreat for all the soldiers. Stephen, with blood smeared across his face, looked up to report the situation. He admitted their forces were clearly at a disadvantage. Retreat seemed the most reasonable option now, but doing so would give the enemy the upper hand and allow them to establish an even stronger strategic position. The strategic map appeared, showing the vital importance of the 5 defensive lines. Stephen explained, if Hector captured any one of them, the rear forces would have a safe path to advance, making the war prolonged and more unpredictable than ever. Roman Dmitri silently observed, his violet eyes shining with focus. He said nothing, but his gaze was enough for Stephen to understand that all his words were being seriously considered. Stephen concluded decisively. There was no other choice. Given the current situation, the team could only move forward, not retreat. He knew well the price of making a mistake, and it was too great to risk hesitation. Roman immediately issued instructions. They had to erect iron barriers to prevent the enemy from breaking through the walls. He would buy time himself so Stephen could gather the soldiers and complete the fortifications. The words showed determination and unwavering leadership. Stephen was stunned by the bold decision. A question echoed in his mind. Does he really accept this risky plan? His face was full of worry and doubt, not yet able to form a concrete reaction. Finally, Stephen spoke, unable to hide his concern. He emphasized the present danger. The enemy was surging forward. If Roman stood alone on the battlefield, the consequence could be death, and the entire front would collapse. Roman quietly responded to Stephen's warning with a calm nod. He understood that fear and did not underestimate it. At that moment, from behind, an enemy warrior suddenly charged forward, carrying a terrifying, murderous intent. Stephen was shocked by the scene before him. His eyes widened, sweat pouring, not from fear but surprise. He realized the enemy had come closer than he thought, and Roman was about to face death head-on. However, Roman showed no hesitation. Just as he affirmed he was no fool to risk his life recklessly, he spun and delivered a precise slash. The lightning-fast sword strike ended the attacker in one blow, leaving Stephen speechless at the calm and exceptional courage of the new leader. Roman Dmitri struck as fast as lightning, cleanly cutting down the enemy charging at him without looking. Without hesitation, he clearly asserted he would not embark on a plan unless he believed he could execute it. Witnessing the enemy felled in an instant, the blue-haired warrior could not hide his astonishment. He stammered, eyes wide open, his mind unable to process that the enemy hadn't even realized they were attacked. A call rang out in the heated air of the battlefield. Soldiers charged forward, their leader voicing concern with "Sir," upon seeing Roman facing danger alone. Roman stood proudly in the midst of the front line, eyes full of determination. He declared the next plan, to break through toward the fortress walls. Without further explanation, a strong order was given. "All follow me." In response to Roman's decisiveness, the troops immediately answered without hesitation. "Understood, sir," they shouted in unison. Lines straightened, eyes fierce, ready to follow him to the very end of the battle. Observing this absolute readiness, the blue-haired warrior reflected silently. They did not hesitate for a second. Within him arose amazement and admiration. Roman Dmitri held the soldiers' hearts like an unshakable steel grip. After finishing his orders, Roman decisively commanded, "Now, go prepare." The kneeling warrior immediately responded, hastily obeying with a tense but determined expression. Standing amid the brutal battlefield, the soldier looked up at the gray sky. Though his body was stained with blood, his eyes shone brightly as he realized one thing: this war had only just begun. The real battle lay ahead. Meanwhile, Chris, the blonde knight, quietly understood why everyone followed Roman without hesitation. Now he clearly grasped the reason behind that unifying strength. Pucky, with a panicked gaze and sweat streaming down, also realized something. The soldiers' fierce loyalty to Roman was not just duty, but absolute faith forged through blood and steel. Roman charged forward, leading the way, with the soldiers immediately following closely behind. Their loyalty did not come from orders, but from absolute respect for their commander.